Welcome to the Social Workers radio talk show on WCDB Albany 90.9 FM with co-host Dr. Eric Hardiman and Alyssa Lotmore. Here at the Social Workers, we address issues important to our communities with social work students, alumni, and community partners as our guests.
As part of the University at Albany School of Social Welfare, we hope to take social work beyond the classroom and agency settings and directly to the public, because the public is the client. Catch us on air, online, and anytime.
Welcome to WCDB. My name is Eric Hardiman, and I'm here with the Social Workers, our regular weekly podcast on WCDB 90.9 FM, and I'm here with my regular co-host, Alyssa Lotmore. Welcome back, Alyssa.
Hi, Eric. Well, great to be here. We have a great lineup today of guests, and a happy Social Work Month.
Happy Social Work Month. March is always Social Work Month, and we love to promote social work causes, talk about issues relevant to the community, relevant to the social work profession, sort of, I don't want to say advertise, but let folks know what it is that social workers do and why social workers are so important to the community. So it's a great month to think about that, and let's talk about that. Do you know, are there more events coming up for Social Work Month? Are there things that our listeners should think about?
I mean, there's always something for Social Work Month. Here at the University at Albany, we're just celebrating. We're just celebrating by, just events for our alumni, for our students, just to recognize the social work profession. And one of the things that is great about our show is we talk about raising social work in terms of who we are and what we do, and sharing stories, raising our voices. And our guests today are the perfect example of that, of how they're sharing stories about and raising awareness and helping to connect with individuals to make them feel not alone and to help raise awareness about issues that are important to them. So, Eric, do you want to do the intro of who our guests are?
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to have our guest with us today. It's always nice to have faculty on our show and students together, and this is a really exciting, creative, innovative project. So we have with us Associate Professor Carmen Serrano, who is director of the Spanish program in LLC, which is the Languages, Literatures, and Cultures department. And Dr. Serrano set out in 2019 to establish a largely student-run podcast, and using a university grant that she received, set up a student-run podcast that gives a voice to underrepresented and marginalized UAlbany students and alumni. It allows them some space to tell their stories that are both instructive and inspiring to others. It's called the UAlbany Stories Podcast. It appeals to both Alyssa and I because, this is a radio show that we do, the Social Workers, but it's also a podcast. We sort of straddle both, and so both formats, and we're excited to talk to other podcasters to find out, Carmen, Dr. Serrano, what you're doing with the podcast format, and also to hear from the students. We have with us Yesenia, Melo, and J-Lyn Thomas. One of whom, Yesenia, is a graduate student. J-Lyn Thomas is an undergraduate student here at UAlbany, and we're thrilled to have all three of you with us here to talk about the UAlbany Student Stories podcast and what it's meant to you. So welcome to the Social Workers.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very glad to have you on the show.
Very excited.
Great. So Carmen, I guess, maybe you could start off, if you don't mind, telling us a little bit about sort of how did the idea for this podcast series come about, and what was the genesis of the idea, and how's it gone so far?
Yeah, great question. Thank you so much. We have wonderful colleagues here at UAlbany and wonderful students. So it was with my colleague, Joanna Drebby. She's in sociology. We were having coffee and we were talking about student retention, and we were talking about the remarkable students and the remarkable stories they share with us. And we thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have a podcast and have the students, tell us these stories? Because a lot of times we have students in the classroom and we don't realize these rich experiences that they've had. So we worked together and we decided to apply for a STAR grant. And as we were applying for the grant, other people joined in collaboration. Jose Cruz from the Rockefeller College, he provided the music for free. He's an executive director of a very important album. My colleagues in LLC, Professor Ilka Kressner, Veronique, Lotfi Sayahi, several people in LLC were supportive, and they were finding students that we could interview. And then people in the Latin American and Caribbean studies, Joana Londoño, Pedro Cavan, Alejandra Bronfman, they all helped identify students and gave feedback when we were writing our grants. Also, we had wonderful librarians such as Ryan and Jesus. They've been so supportive, and they shared great ideas about recording and archiving. We record in the library. They have a recording studio in the basement. Once we got our grant, we recorded in 2019, and we identified students that we knew from our classrooms, most of them first generation college students, and we recorded, and we were quite successful, but then COVID hit. And we had to halt production for a couple years, as we were going through this collective cataclysmic event, we had to stop. And then the students did record some sound notes. So we have an archive of what the students felt. And those are hard to listen to right now, going back to those sound notes, because we were all so scared. But once it was safe to record again, we relaunched our podcast in spring of 2022. And as of today, we have uploaded over 30 episodes.
That's incredible. So you mentioned sound notes. What are sound notes? If listeners are wondering what that might mean.
Yeah, so students during COVID, since we couldn't get together, they would record something on their phone, and they would send me the recording, and we uploaded those. So you'll see that we started the recording, then there's these sound notes, and then a gap, and then we start again. But the sound notes were just the students recording their feelings and their experiences and submitting those. They're very powerful.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I've listened to several episodes of, many episodes, I guess, of your podcast. It's been going on so long. And some of the stories are very serious about difficult struggles to maybe enter and afford college, immigration, cultural stereotyping, non-traditional pathways. These are all things that students are being vulnerable about and sharing to a larger audience. And I'd just love to know, maybe Carmen, you can jump in first, and then the students can chime in about their experience. What was this process like to prepare students to share this type of information? Was there some fears, nerves? What was the preparation like?
Yeah, the students, we've had students who wanted to contribute, but then because they knew this was such a public process, they decided to, maybe it was too personal. But other students felt that they wanted to share their stories because they thought they could help other students. And many of them are seniors, and they're like, well, if I went through this, if I had these issues, and then I found these mentors or these support groups, and then I graduated, I want to help other students. So I think I'm really impressed with the students because they're concerned for the younger generations that are coming to UAlbany, and they want them to be successful. So I think I'm really impressed with the students and the empathy and responsibility that they're showing by recording these podcasts.
I see Yesenia shaking her head. You want to jump in about your experience first, and then we'll go to J-Lyn?
Yeah, definitely. I think the stories that are on the podcast are like surprisingly vulnerable. I think that people don't really expect that sort of depth from college students, but I think the population at UAlbany is so unique in the fact that lots of us are like first generation. I'm not first generation. I don't know why I said us, but lots of the students are first generation. I would consider myself, I guess, 1.5 generation of like my mom went to college, but I didn't. So it's very difficult to even begin the process of going to college. And so this is like what a lot of people talk about, and getting the people to feel, the guests to feel safe is a lot, definitely on the host, as I'm sure you guys know, creating a very safe environment and I feel like me and J-Lyn, we kind of make it seem very chill, like, hey, this is a conversation about your life. All of this already, it's not a quiz. And just talk about how you feel, and just creating that rapport beforehand is really important, I think.
And was this something that you had an interest in before, Yesenia, in terms of using media like podcast and sort of using that platform of interviewing and storytelling, or is this something that was new to you?
This was entirely new. Dr. Serrano, she just asked me if I wanted to be on the team, and I was like, you know what, that's like really different. I'm actually pretty introverted in my everyday life, so it's definitely a good way for me to kind of branch out. And so in the same way that these people are learning about what it's like to be on the podcast, I'm also learning about them and what it is like to be a podcast host.
Great.
J-Lyn, do you want to jump in and add your experience?
Yes, I took a class with Dr. Serrano last semester, and she asked me if I wanted to be a part of the podcast team. And at first I was like, I don't know what I would contribute to the team. And then she basically gave me the rundown of what the goal of the podcast was and like how I would be able to contribute. And I said, yes, I would do it. Because me and my friends, we said that we always wanted to do a podcast, but we never gotten around to it. And then when I was presented with this opportunity, I said, wow, I should actually do this. So this is my first time on the podcast. And our goal is to basically like share the stories of the students and the alumni, and then have a comfortable space for like people to listen to the stories, the unique stories that people would like to share.
And how are students selected to tell their stories? What's the selection process like?
Well, one way is that Dr. Serrano, she suggests us students that are interested in being in the podcast, because we do a lot of advertisement within the LLC department with the students that are in the LLC department. And then we also, as the host, Yesenia and I, we email some group organizations or individual people that we know that have unique stories. And then we ask them, hi, would you like to be a part of the podcast and share your story publicly? So it's just based on the suggestions that we get, and also just reaching out to people.
Now, what has the feedback been like, or even the response? Like I said, you touch on some pretty tough issues at times, which might be triggers for individuals, or individuals who might, students who might want to reach out and say like, hey, is there a resource for that? Or I can relate to that. What has the response been, and how have you navigated that?
I feel like the response has been very positive, to be honest. I always tell my friends like, hey, go listen to my podcast. And they're like, wow, this podcast is like, I guess maybe they don't expect it to be as professional as it is, because I think we do a really good job. And they're always very impacted, like, like it's a serious thing. People are always excited to hear about these topics, because they're topics that people can relate to, and things that, everybody is going through, but nobody's talking about, which I really love about this podcast, that we are uplifting these stories that everybody's kind of silently going through together, but nobody's really able to hear themselves in, to see themselves represented in something. So the overall response, I think, has been really great.
No, that's good. And I'm sure as a university, we have a lot of resources. If anyone does want to reach out, or something was triggering, we have so many resources on campus, even for mental health or for counseling, if anyone did want to talk more about their own experience, more privately.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, the response has been wonderful. So, and we have listeners across the country. So they're always excited to hear the latest episode, and they're just so impressed with our students. And the fact they always comment on how wonderful the questions are, and how natural the conversation is, how much they learn. And they're just really impressed with the students and their stories.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me thinking about this project, because I think, as I get the sense you may think as well, the three of you, that the students really are the lifeblood of any university, but particularly at UAlbany, we have such a rich diversity of students and student experience, student background. And I think sometimes, people in the community may drive through the campus, they may drive by, they may see advertisements. They may hear about the university and hear about some of the bigger stories at the university, but they don't always get to know actual students. And it's really the actual students who are the heart and soul of the university, and that really make up its special qualities. And so I really think a project like what you're doing is shining an important spotlight on those individual stories. So I wonder if any of the three of you have thought, I'm sure you have thought about that, but this notion of storytelling and the power of storytelling, which podcasting allows for in a different way than other formats. What do you see as the most important aspects of storytelling? And anybody can jump in with that.
I think an important aspect of storytelling would be authenticity, because since these stories are shared publicly and it's normally personal stories, it's good to be able to express how you feel in the moment or the specific topics that you want to speak about that had an impact on your life, because it can be able to motivate someone else or just be a way of consoling someone in the same situation that they're possibly in. So to be able to just like spread awareness and be truthful about what you're saying and producing to help others.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I totally agree, J-Lyn. I feel like authenticity is really, I think it's kind of like the secret to our podcast is that everything that we talk about is really authentic. It's really real, very raw. And I think people enjoy that. I think this comes along with any sort of media. There is sort of like a fabricated nature to it because you have to, but I think the authenticity is really what drives our podcast and what makes it unique.
Yeah. And for me, what is really impressive is that these stories are heartfelt and engaging. They're grounded in the humanities, of course, and the students are the teachers. And through their stories, they're showing us the power of empathy. And in many ways, what they're doing is a way to strengthen our democratic practices in the US. These students are, the next leaders, right? And they're talking about issues that are important to them: civil rights, social justice, inequality, mental health, sexism, racism. Their conversations also suggest that through dialogue, we can build a more inclusive society. And they also implicitly tell us how humanities supports civic participation. Mm. So important in sustaining our fragile democracy. And through these podcasts, the students are creating solidarity and empathy. That's our listening community. And the podcast is also a powerful research and teaching tool. I know some of my colleagues are using these in the classroom. So those are some of the things that I think are important about this podcast.
Were you surprised? I mean, this has taken off. You have a really wide audience. Like you said, people, across the United States, people are listening, and you're on, what season number are you guys on now?
Season 4, right, Yesenia?
Yep, season 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you expect this when you were in 2019, when you were applying for that grant and starting this? I mean, did you expect it to get as big as it is now?
No. And I love it. I love it. And I love it because the students are the center and they're the teachers, and we're learning about their lives and what's happening. So I'm thrilled, I'm delighted, and we're going to keep doing this. And, the students get college credit for doing this. So that's the motive, that's motivating for them because it helps them, and they get practical experiences. The students are actually getting very good jobs when they mention that they're on a podcast. So it's really good in terms of their, career prospects.
Yeah.
So there's so many positive things about this. So I'm just, my biggest hope is to continue to get institutional support, and Alyssa, you and I are going to apply for an NEH grant, right? So we're going to keep applying for grant money, because I would like to provide funding for the students, like in form of a stipend or something in the future.
So if you've just tuned in, you're listening to WCDB Albany. This is the Social Workers radio show, live radio show, and associated podcast. And we're talking with Dr. Carmen Serrano, who is director of the Spanish program in Languages, Literatures, and Cultures department here at the University at Albany. And we also have with us Yesenia, Melo, and J-Lyn Thomas, both of whom are students here at the University at Albany and who are part of the podcast team with the UAlbany Stories Podcast. And it's just been so great hearing about this podcast project and the successes. And, you mentioned, Dr. Serrano, you just mentioned civic participation, and it really got me thinking a little bit about how students, and I'd love to hear from Yesenia and J-Lyn, the notion of kind of participating in dialogue and kind of being part of the public discourse. This being part of a podcast team means that your voice is getting out there and that you are getting your thoughts and ideas out there, and you're sort of entering into a public discourse, for lack of a better term. And not all students do that. Some students see education as a two-dimensional process where you go to class and you learn and you leave class, and this is seems to me extra. It seems to me that you're engaging in conversations and being part of things in a very different way. So I'd love to hear from your experience what that's been like for you. Is it empowering? How's it shaped you?
I would say that discourse is a very large part of education that people often overlook. I think that in order to dismantle or kind of work past these systematic issues that exist in this country, we need to talk about them. People need to know their situation. People need to know the systematic like rules and stuff that are put in place to keep us in our social classes and in our the positions that we're in poverty and in all these situations. So I think the first step is awareness, and people always say, knowledge is power. So I think that being able to talk about these topics openly and to create this discourse has been really great. I've always enjoyed engaging in discourse, but I really enjoy that my peers and other people are really liking it too.
Right. J-Lyn?
So far, this work has been really fun and empowering. I don't see it as schoolwork or anything that's like hard. It's really fun to connect with the podcast team, with Yesenia, and also our marketing and our editing team, as when we record together, we're all in the same room together. We all have like the same reactions, are excited to bring in guests and like hear their individual stories. So it's very fun just to be a part of it and also see the back end of things that most people don't usually know about when it comes to recording podcasts. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and they're also gaining practical skills because they have to schedule, record, come up with questions. If I understand, you meet with the guests before, don't you do like a pre-interview?
Yeah, a little bit, just to get a sense of what they're going to talk about. But there's also that sense of authenticity that J-Lyn talked about. We don't want to know too much of the story because we want our reactions to be, authentic in the moment too.
Yeah. But those skills are so important, just even the technical skills of putting a podcast together. I'm sure the two of you have learned just immense amounts of knowledge that maybe you hadn't expected to. And you have new skill sets, and that, as Dr. Serrano said, those are transferable, and that's a really exciting and innovative type of learning, I believe.
And one of the whole things of why we started the Social Workers, this show, I had gone to a conference and somebody had said, if you don't tell your story, somebody else will tell it, and they'll tell it wrong. And when we were talking about what are we going to do with this podcast, who is our audience, who do we want to have as guests, it was really about having people come on and share their expertise. Everyone's an expert in their own life. I can't talk about Eric's life. He can talk about it the best himself. And it's how do we have our guests come on and be able to share their stories, share what's important to them. We're more so, in the social work field, but that's what we wanted to do with this show. And it seems like you have created something very, in the similar in the sense of being able to give individuals a platform to share that authentic story to a larger audience. And that creates change. It's like you're change agents. That's creating a type of change because it's raising awareness. It's helping to have people amplify people's voices and get the message out there about what's going on. What are these individual experiences? And other people can relate to that. So I think it's great work that you're doing. And I hope to see more types of just shows or different forms of media that allow people the opportunity to be able to express themselves like that and to amplify their voice.
So speaking of the future, I'm so curious, what do you see as the next steps for the UAlbany Student Stories podcast? And that's one question. And then my second of the two-part question is, if you had more resources, if you had bigger grants and you had, more money and resources, what would you hope and dream for with this podcast series? Because I just think it's so phenomenal what you've achieved already with fairly limited resources, but a wonderful team, quite clearly. If you had more, what are the things that you would like to see happen? Anybody can answer that.
I know that we've all been talking about adding the video podcast element to it. I know that people really want to see that. As a podcast consumer myself, I always enjoy watching my podcast rather than just listening. So that's something that we definitely want to do in the future. Maybe we could add like some fun, like special effects or something. I don't know. With, we can always play around if we had some more resources. So I know that that's something we've been talking about.
Yeah, if we had more resources, definitely the video podcasting, because that's really popular right now. And we've talked to Ryan, the librarian, and it sounds like they're going to set up the room so that there is video podcasting. So I would like that. I would like to have maybe a consultant help us with some of the technical skills, so we could maybe add some sound effects, get closer to an NPR quality. I mean, that would be wonderful. And like I mentioned, paying the students a stipend. I like that they get credit, but I would also like to provide the students a stipend and maybe the storytellers a stipend so that we can give them something for sharing their stories. So that would be, some of the money would go to that, and maybe advertising, having something so that our stories go beyond what we can do with no budget.
Yeah. J-Lyn, did you have something to add?
Yes, I will also like to see the podcast team expanding, because I do get a lot of people that come up to me and they ask, oh, how can I be a part of it? What can I do to be someone additional to the team? So I hope that there will be more aspects to the podcast team, and there will be ways that other people can get exposure to gaining the practical skills and being on the team. Not so of if they can choose, like if they want to be a host or they want to be a part of marketing or be a co-editor, something of that sort to expand it.
They're all great ideas. Yeah, it's great to hear your ideas and vision for the podcast. And, just the fact that you're in your 4th season, but also thinking about what the next steps might be and where it goes from here, and, how this can get spread far and wide so that other folks can hear these wonderful stories.
Like our audience, who probably want to know, how can they find you guys? How do they find UAlbany Student Stories?
Well, we're on several platforms. We're on Anchor, iTunes. I think there's Google Podcast. And people can email me at cserrano4@albany.edu, and I can, send them a link to our podcast. So if you type in any of the platforms, UAlbany Student Stories, you should be able to find us.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I know this is what a lot of our audience, they love stuff like this. This is our audience tends to, love these personal stories, and it's all about, like you said, it's hitting on so many of the issues of social justice and the things that social workers want to hear about. So absolutely. I think you'll definitely gain a few listeners after this episode, because we just love sharing tool, like the resources and what's out there that people might enjoy to hear.
Yeah, thank you very much. I follow the numbers. I'm always looking after every episode, we get new listeners. So I'm always tracking that. Thank you very much for helping us.
We are also on Instagram as well. Our Instagram is called Albany Student Stories, and it has the direct link to all of our podcasts and like the different platforms that we produce our podcasts, and also just some personal pictures of the production team as well.
Great. This is first of all, you've both Yesenia and J-Lyn have done a wonderful job talking about your experience on the podcast, and it's great to have you share your experiences with our audience. And I feel like there's, as Alyssa said, there's some crossover between the subjects that your stories cover and what we cover here on the social workers. But this project is just tremendously exciting to me and seems just incredibly innovative in the way it's bringing together faculty and staff and students in a co-production type of capacity and collaborative capacity, and giving you new roles and new skills, and also most importantly highlighting those important stories that our students have and letting others hear those stories. So phenomenal work, and keep up the great work. We're excited to hear about the next steps.
Thank you so much. We actually just released a podcast episode today, so make sure to go listen to that on anywhere you get your podcasts.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's called UAlbany Student Stories, and we've been talking with Dr. Carmen Serrano, Yesenia Melo, and J-Lyn Thomas, both of whom are students here at the University of Albany and who are making us proud in the UAlbany community and just doing wonderful work. And thank you so much for being our guests on the Social Workers. Alyssa, do you want to take us out and share with our regular listeners where they can find us?
Yeah, again, I'd just like to say happy Social Work Month to all our listeners. And you can find us, we'll have more episodes out this semester. You can always find us on Apple Podcasts, the same as UAlbany Student Stories, the Social Workers Radio Talk Show.
Yeah. And if you just enter that in a search engine, the Social Workers Radio Talk Show, you'll find us, and lots of information, lots of previous episodes. This has been an exciting episode. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for listening. This is the Social Workers on WCDB Albany.